guys get started. Exactly. Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Harbor Advisory Board. It's Thursday, September 6th, 2018. We're in the Veterans Memorial Building, 209 Surf Street in Morro Bay. And we do have a quorum this evening, and we also have two new members that I would like to introduce the public to. Sharice Hansen has joined us in the Waterfront Leaseholder Chair, and Mark Blackford has joined us in one of the Member-at-Large chairs. So welcome, and thank you for being willing to do it. Hey. So we'll call ourselves to order. We already were, I think, when I said that, and we'll have a moment of silence, please. Okay, thank you. Pledge of Allegiance. And Mark, we're going to let you lead off.
Please begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so now we have Chair, Advisory Board Member, and Liaison announcements and/or presentations. So we'll start with our Liaison, Councilman Makowetsky. Do you have anything for us this evening? No? Thank you for being here. Sharice?
Hello.
Do you have, so this is the time when each of the members, if they have some sort of an announcement regarding a civic activity or some event that they're aware of, or anything that they think would be of interest to the public. And no is okay.
And nothing for this evening. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Dana?
Thank you, Ron. Well, a couple things. The museum, Maritime Museum, that has been in process for quite a while. They're looking to open at the end of this month, so the 28th, which is a Friday, right before Harbor Festival. That week leading up will be kind of their grand opening. So they're working on a lot of displays. They have everything from the Salinan Indian tribes. They've got a display there. They also have ag industry, other commercial fishing, historical exploration on the West Coast, the military operations, just quite a bit of interesting stuff in that little tiny building. We just set a 5,000-pound anchor, Navy anchor, the other day in front of it. That's part of a display for the 1542 crowd, which were individuals and organizations that donated to really kickstart the whole building of the museum. And another thing, coming up on the Harbor Fest, we have the Harbor Fest Cup. It's a sailing race that happens during the Harbor Fest. It is, I think, the only water event during the Harbor Fest. There used to be a paddleboard. Are they bringing that back? Oh, excellent. Good. That's great. Good to hear that. So that will be going on at Harbor Fest first weekend in October. And I believe that's it.
I spoke with, I saw Bertha Tyler just a few minutes ago. Bertha Tyler, the Tyler family actually donated the anchor that Dana, to the museum that Dana was making reference to. And I would encourage the museum to invite her down for a photo op, and Neil Farrell.
Yeah, they have a staff person on their board who is all about
Talking to the wrong guy? Is that what
yeah. I'm actually not on their board. I just help
But
them out a lot.
Bertha's not been contacted.
Oh, she's been contacted about it quite a bit. It's
Okay.
It's an ongoing thing,
Okay.
but there'll also be a plaque
Sure.
for the Tylers,
Sure.
their donation for that, and many other things
Sure.
that they've helped out with.
Sure. Okay,
I think,
good.
can I say one more thing? The museum has quite a few artifacts and quite a bit of information. A lot of it's in storage, what have you. But the funny thing is, one thing that they could use is some old local fishing photos. So anybody out there has some of that just sitting around, they want to donate, that could be a really big help for part of that display.
Pete, could you send an email out to the organization? Could you do that and ask them to, if they've got something, to put them in contact with Dana?
I'd be glad to.
That'd be great, thanks. Mark?
Nothing at this time.
Okay. Lynn?
Nothing.
Okay. Pete?
Just sitting in for Jeremiah and looking forward to the Harbor Festival and working with the association with the typical program, which I think involves food.
Gene?
Yeah, it's been a typical summer on the bay. A few halibut have caught. I talked to a man the other day who got a nice 12-pounder right in the moorings there, so that's good to see. Grassy Island George has a new aluminum boat. It's really, really cool. And the long-range predictions for the weathers is they're predicting an El Nino for this winter. So it's not too early to go check your lines and make sure your pennant lines are up to snuff, because winter is coming. So that's it.
Okay. And I would like to let the public and the board know that on October 20th this year, the Community Foundation of Estero Bay will have its 10th annual Morro Bay Sings event. And the musical theme this year as your favorites from the 40s and the 50s. There will be musicians, live musicians there, and there will be a silent auction and a live auction and food prepared by Tognazzini's and the Galley Restaurant. And we hope everyone will avail themselves of that. It's a $50 ticket. $40 of that goes right straight to the mission of the Community Foundation, which is to help kids who could otherwise not afford to do it participate in Estero Bay area organized sports. So it's local, Los Osos, Morro Bay, and Cayucas. Okay, that brings us to public comment. This is a period of time where anyone from the public can speak on anything that is not on the agenda or can speak to an agenda item for which they cannot stay. And we don't have any folks in the audience tonight, so apparently everybody is at home watching us on the television. So that takes us to A1, which is approval of the minutes from the Harbor Advisory Board meeting that was held on August 2nd, 2018. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, second? Moved and second. So discussion, does anyone have any corrections or additions to those minutes? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Carries. Thank you. So B1, Harbor Department Status Report. Director Andersby?
Thank you, Mr. Reisner, and welcome to our two new Habbers. So another busy month out on the bay. As Gene said, there's been a lot of activity. Been a lot of folks out in the water. Has been almost up into the mid-60s, which is pretty unusual. So every once in a while we get up into the low 60s for a few days, usually in the fall, but it's been kind of persistent and strange. So we'll see where that goes. So again, welcome Sharice and Mark to the board. Looking forward to your participation. Department activity over the last month, we've had about 11 emergency responses, just over 100 calls for service, 47 assists, and 25 enforcement contacts, and some weather warnings. Some of the highlights of that, and there's some photos in the back of the status report as well. We wrapped up a busy summer with the Morro Bay and Cayucas Junior Lifeguard programs. We helped them out with doing some boat safety and awareness, and then we do some jet ski rescue training with them as well, which is a great program for the kids and great training for us as well. So We had about 300 kids from the combined agencies or the combined programs go through. I think Morro Bay, this year we had about 80 kids in two groups for about 160, and then Cayucas had a few less than that, but it's still a good number of kids. So great program. Anybody that's got kids, if you want to get your kid through the program, it's kind of like buying Stones tickets. You've got to have your finger on the button and be ready to push by when the thing opens up for registration. So it closes within hours at this point. So be fast about it because they fill up pretty quickly. We're trying to build the program. Like I said, we used to be about 60 kids per session. Now we're up to 80, and we may go up to more, but it really depends on staffing and what we're able to do. So great program. On August 3rd, we were dispatched to the Rock for a 5-year-old girl who apparently had no parents in attendance. Eventually, the grandmother was found. Lifeguards were the ones that alerted us to the situation. We came down and found the grandmother, who was counseled by the police department. Apparently, she had gone uptown to go do some shopping or something else and left the 5-year-old on the beach. So she had a good talking to from the police department. We participated in National Night Out, which is a program that happens nationwide, where police, fire, and rescue departments get together and sort of showcase themselves and present themselves to the community for sort of an open house. This year we did it at Lila Kaiser Park, or at not Lila Kaiser, at Clijsters Park. Great program, a lot of folks there. Coast Guard was there as well for water safety and state parks. Basically all the agencies, Morro Bay Police Department, the ones that put that on. So look for that next year again. On the 11th, we provided some safety services for folks in the water, and we're there to support a memorial service for a Cayucas lifeguard who passed away earlier this year. Alex Skinny Taylor was a guard that worked for Morro Bay and Cayucas, mostly for Cayucas. He also worked in the junior guard programs. Great kid. Passed away surfing earlier this year up in Cayucas, so wished our best to his family. He was a great kid. He'll be missed. On August 14th, we responded to a call up to Cayucas, an emergency response for somebody missing in the surf, boogie boarder off of the Old Creek area, 10th Street or so. We responded up with a boat, patrol boat with one rescue swimmer on board, and we got on scene and fortunately found the victim fairly quickly due to the conditions. Unfortunately, he was face down, brought back to the beach by our rescue swimmer, Jeremiah, and turned over to Cayucas Fire. Attempts to revive him, unfortunately, were not successful. And he had swam out, apparently, to help his son, who was apparently caught in a rip tide, a rip current on his boogie board. So just beware. Situations like that, sometimes best to wait for other help to show up, but just be careful out there in the ocean. On the 19th, assisted the Coast Guard with an emergency response off of 24th Street in Cayucas. A little power boat, a little recreational fishing boat broke down just outside the surf line. Their anchor was dragging. Fortunately, we were able to get to them before they went into the surf. We were able to tow them out back into the harbor. The Coast Guard did a safety inspection. Apparently, their battery had gone dead. So, like good fishermen, they replaced their battery and went back out fishing. And then finally on the 24th, we had a capsized kayaker in the bay, fairly standard incident, but we still respond to that as an emergency because, as you know, the water can be cold, although 64 is not too bad. Typically it's much colder. But with the tide flowing, people can get swept away from the kayak or swept into boats or into moorings, so we always treat that as an emergency, even when somebody just falls off, so got to be aware of those. Recent council activity, there's been a fair amount of action on the city council with regard to harbor department lately. And I'll bring this up in a little more detail in one of our items with talking about some of the leases. I think it's C5. On a special meeting on August 14th, the council adopted a resolution approving a consent of landowner, which is the city's permission for a developer to go develop a property or go do a project. This was to the United States Coast Guard for the station Morro Bay to do a moderate little building expansion, as you know, and I think we've been talking for a few years now. They've had about $1.4 million to spend on some sort of an expansion. Their current building was built in the early 90s to serve the two cutters that were here. Was never meant to be a full station to service 24-hour on-duty surf lifeboat crews. And so it's really, if you were to build it today, it's about 3 times smaller than it needs to be right now. So they're undersized by about 3 times. So they got a little bit extra money, and we've been trying to identify a spot recently to build, and they've landed on building on the backside of their station into the parking spaces. So I'll go into a little more detail on that when we get to that point. In addition, on the special meeting, on the 14th, the city manager was authorized to execute an agreement with a company revenue and cost specialist to update the city's comprehensive user fees, which is basically the master fee schedule, and the cost allocation plan, which is something we've been working on trying to get updated and harping on for a number of years. So it's good to see that to go out, and development of impact fees as well. So that'll go out if it's not out on the street already, and hopefully come back in time for budget processing next spring. So we'll see what that comes up with. Then August 28th, council took 4 actions with regard to our department. One, they approved a grant for $25,500 from Department of Boating and Waterways for us to purchase 2 new rescue watercraft or jet skis. Our 2 existing craft are about 5 years old, although that doesn't sound old. Those boats take a lot of beating when they're in and out of the surf and underwater and up on the beach all the time, so we're getting 2 new watercraft there, which will be great. They had also adopted a resolution approving some couple of amendments to 2 different leases, and I'll get into one of these leases because it's also on that C5 item. One of them was an amendment to the master lease for the boatyard, and one was an amendment to the master lease for the Otter Rock Cafe. Boatyard, as you know, had a seawall failure a few years ago, and that's been an ongoing resolution and negotiation with that owner. Coastal Commission recently required them, as part of their permit to repair the seawall, to extend their harbor walk or their boardwalk on the backside of that building to 10 feet beyond the existing 8, so that's going to mean a pretty big change to their plan, so they went back and renegotiated some concessions for that. And then the Otter Rock Cafe item I'll talk about when we get to that item, but that was the same owner that owns the boatyard is in escrow to buy the Otter Rock, and so he's got a pretty significant proposal plan to redevelop that site that I'll talk about later. And on the 28th, the council approved the Harbor Advisory Board goal objective item to establish a dry boat storage yard in the Triangle parking lot. So I'll end of commensurate budget amendment to pay for basically the improvements that we'll need, which essentially will be fencing to begin with. So I'll be shopping around for some fencing here fairly soon, and hopefully be able to start renting that yard out for some use for dry boat storage. And then on the 28th, council approved putting out the RFP for the Marine Service Facility Financial Feasibility Study, so the Boatyard Financial Feasibility Study, and reaffirmed the financial commitment to complete it. We did modify the proposal a little bit that was in front of them at the council meeting to put out the RFP, and the work product will be in a phased approach. In the first phase, we'll look at issues and items that are potential, I guess, go-no-go points that if they can't be overcome from a financial feasibility standpoint, there's no point in looking at the rest of the items from a financial standpoint. So we're going to be revising our RFP, and I'll be looking towards the ad hoc committee here probably next week to see if we can start making those revisions and get that out on the street. Any questions on any of those before I go on?
Gene?
Yes, there was a horse rescue?
Yesterday?
Yes.
Yesterday, there was 2 riders on the beach on horses, and they were ponying, which is a new thing I've learned. Ponying 2 other horses, which is apparently having another horse unsaddled in tow just to ride along with you. I guess it trains the other horse to be a horse, I don't know. So apparently one of the horses bucked one of the riders and ran off, and the 2 horses being ponied, the unsaddled horses took off with them. They were down at the pit area of the beach, ran southbound up into the dunes just south of Morrow Creek, and ended up in the corner of the dune area right at Coleman Beach, where the Embarcadero goes straight dirt and you can go out to the rock on Coleman, right there where the fencing is in the habitat behind the fence on the other side of the road. Fortunately, they stopped in there. Apparently one of them tried to get up over the fence and scraped up its leg, but they stayed in there, and then 2 citizens walking went in and grabbed them, calmed them down, and got them under control. We all went and found the owners, and the owners went and grabbed the trailer and went and got the horses.
So there was a stampede?
Yeah, in short, there was a small stampede. Or maybe it was a race, I don't know.
Wow. Gene, anything else? That point of interest?
Yes.
Yeah. Peter? Okay. Lynn? Mark?
Does the boat repair facility plan call for any form of boat removal equipment or crane?
Yeah, it will, so to quickly get you up to speed, it's envisioned in the Triangle parking lot, which is that most southern property behind the Maritime Museum, that big lot. The haul-out area would be in those slips between the South Tea Pier and Stack's Wine Bar, and yeah, it would have to have wouldn't have a crane, it'd have a regular travel lift, it'd be the plan for that, because you have to carry it quite a distance.
Thank you.
Yep.
Dana?
No questions.
Sharice?
No questions.
Eric, if you're able to tell us and the public, what's your target date by which people could contact the Harbor Department about storing a boat and/or a trailer in the Triangle lot?
I'd probably say give me a month. I'll correct that immediately, now. I won't say we'll assign them something and tell them to go there yet, but if I can get interest and start creating a list, absolutely, yeah, I'd say now. I'm hoping to get some fence quotes and get some layout ideas and get the fencing up within the next few weeks, so,
Because the fee schedule is set, is that not correct?
yes.
Yes. Okay. And
Yeah,
the
so they
layout.
contact us now.
And the layout is known, and,
Yeah, we have a potential layout, we'll get the fence up and go from there.
okay, great, thank you.
Now I have a question,
Sure.
now that you opened the box. Yeah, as far as letting people know, if we can start doing that and you're making a list, that's a good thing. I just happy to hear that because I know of some people that are looking to be on that list right now.
I mean,
As far as advertising goes, you're not going to do that yet, or?
No, I'm not going to do that yet. If people are interested, they can come contact us. If we do fill up, obviously we'll have to establish a waiting list, which the policy anticipates, but I don't anticipate we'll fill up right at the beginning. But who knows? Maybe we will.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And one more question, what is your target date for issuing the Marine Facilities Financial Feasibility RFP?
ASAP. As soon as I can get with the committee and do some revisions to it and get it out.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to get with you guys next week.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay,
Okay, moving on. Anything else on those items? I've still got more to go. On the fishing front, and Peter can fill in more if he needs to. Really, the only thing I've got to report there is recreational ground fishing depth has changed. We got to go deeper than, what was the current? 30 fathoms? Yeah, we were at I think we were at 40 fathoms, and we were able to go to 50 or 60 fathoms, and then they changed it back. So we're back to the shallower water, and that was effective August 25th. Otherwise, like Gene says, I think we had a little sea bass hit out there. I know I saw some crossing the docks, so the warm water, some squid must have showed up. But there's been a lot of activity, a lot of halibut showing up. It's been great. Upcoming events, and most of all these have websites you can go to on the 7th, which is tomorrow. Annual Taste of the Grove event, which I don't know what it is, do you? I don't have much info about this one, but it's put on by the Avocado Margarita Festival. You can go. I think it's out on Highway 41 in one of the avocado groves. Good event out there, and look at the Avocado Margarita Fest, avomargfest.com, and you can find on their website more information about that. Avocado and Margarita Street Festival on Saturday, the 8th. Again, go to their website, avomargfest.com, for that. Baywood Lighted Boat Parade, 6 to 9 p.m., also on the 8th, Saturday, in the Back Bay Cafe and back in Los Osos, Baywood. December 6th, Jesse King Memorial Paddle Race, and that's during Harborfest weekend, so we've got that event as well. Jesse King was one of our lifeguards and an ex-Coast Guardsman who passed away boy, it's probably 6 or 7 years ago now, in a diving accident up in Cambria. Also on the 6th was obviously the Harbor Festival, 37th Annual Harbor Festival, still down in the core of the Embarcadero, not at the north end as it was historically. And 10/26 on October 26th, Heroes Wine Walk. You can go to that Eventbrite for more detail on that event. And then we have 2 tall ships slated to arrive in November for about 21 days, from the 28th to December 18th, and those will be at South T Pier tying up, as opposed to Marina Square where they've been historically in the past. And then I just want to bring up again, one more time, although we've put it on Facebook and elsewhere, the activity out on the water just north of the rock. You see a crane barge and some tugboats and a couple other barges. That's Dynegy Power Plant. That plant, as most of you should be able to recall, or most of you can recall, used to run on bunker oil, and that oil was stored in tanks on site at the north end of the plant. They switched to natural gas, I think, in the late 1980s, and stopped using bunker oil. Well, that bunker oil came from tanker ships, and those tankers used to come and moor offshore and transfer their oil to those tanks. And Dynegy and PG&E and Duke Energy, all before that, have maintained those pipelines until today, because they just wanted to maintain them and didn't want to have to take them out and re-permit them if they're ever needed in the future. But they're at the point where State Lands Commission is now requiring them to be taken out because they're ceasing to lease the area from state lands. And so they're taking the 2 pipelines out. There's a 16-inch and I think a 24-inch pipeline. They run from the plant through the dunes where the horses stampeded, and down across the beach and off into the ocean, about in a line from the gatehouse more or less to the boats, if you were to draw birds, crows, as a crow's fly line across there. When they put them into the surf line, starting somewhere in the dry sand, they went in and they built 2 piers out, drove a cofferdam trench, basically sheet pile to build a cofferdam, dug out between the sheet pile, and then laid the pipe down inside and then pulled out the sheet pile. So they're buried a good 20 feet in the sand right now. They weren't just laid on the bottom and allowed to be covered. They dug them down deep through the surf line, and eventually they come up and meet the surface again out in probably 40 or 50 feet of water. And so right now they're cutting the crane barge has got a big clipper on it. It goes down with divers. They grab the pipe, cut it, pick up the section, throw it on a barge, which they're taking by barge down to Los Angeles for recycling. Once they get into sand too deep to use that machine on outside the surf line, they've got what's called a dynamic pipe ram that they're going to put on both ends of the pipe on the beach. They'll dig it up on the beach, cut it, pull it away. But the section in between in the surf line, they're not going to obviously put another pier out and build that whole cofferdam configuration. So they've got 2 machines that they put on either end that are rams, large hydro pneumatic rams. I'm not quite sure what they are, but they ram the pipe from both ends with the idea to try and pull it out of the sand. The depth that it's at and the weight of the sand above it is, I would guess, is going to prevent that pipe from going anywhere, but they just don't know. So State Lands is requiring them to try and get it out. If it can't come out, they'll leave it in place. And then the pipeline, once you get off the beach into the dunes, they're going to leave that pipeline in place because there's no sense digging up the dunes, and they'll fill it with cement to inert it, and cement to make it inert, and then that'll be the project. So it continues on until about, I think, mid-October. You can go to the city's Facebook page for more information. It's gone through lots and lots of permitting through Coastal Commission, City of Morro Bay, State Lands Commission, Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, all regional water quality, all the regulatory agencies out there. It's gone through all the permitting. They've got a lay yard out at the south end of the south side of the creek, out at the parking lot, the Morro Creek parking lot out there. Where they'll be staging for pipeline removal, the stuff that's coming off the beach. And then like I said, all the offshore will happen by barge, and the pipeline will all get carried out down to LA for recycling. Like I say, they're hoping to be done sometime October. It just depends on how that ramming goes, getting that pipeline out of the bottom. Any questions on those?
Gene?
Yes, I understand from Paul from Associated Divers that they're requiring a Indian native diver to review the dredging of the sand down there to see if there's any artifacts in the soil, in the sand underwater.
Because they are having to, the pipeline's on the surface, laid on the bottom, obviously, and when the ships would come in, it had lines going to it, and they'd put it on the ship, grab the line, pull the pipeline up, hook it up to the ship, and the pipeline would go lay back down the bottom. But at some point, it starts fading down into the sand, and so they're going to dig down to a certain depth. I think they'll jet it out to a certain depth and be able to get that cutter down. But once it probably 5-6 feet or more below the sand level, they're not going to be able to do that. And so I assume that's probably in that area where the sort of interfaces where they're looking for those artifacts.
The point being is, the idea is that 10,000 years ago, the shore was much lower, and that indigenous people walked along the shoreline, and there might be something out there.
Okay, and then on to the pending HAB recommendations matrix. Item number 1, no new updates, although I guess I do have a new update, but not when I wrote this. I met, in San Luis Obispo today with state parks and county parks and a few others about an unrelated issue, but Dan Follett, the superintendent of the state parks district, was there, and I mentioned to him again that we're highly interested in getting back together on the state park marina and the future of that, and he agreed that they are too, and he's pending a tentative date from the concession and rental folks, leasing folks up in Sacramento to set a date to come down here to meet with us to re-engage on those talks. So hopefully something will be coming of that fairly soon, and we'll get the talks going again with state parks. Any questions on that? Nope. Item 2, the modified section of municipal code and for develop environmental best management practices, no new updates on that. Item 3, issuance of a marine service facility RFP document for financial feasibility, as I spoke earlier. That's already been approved by the council, and that'll be going out here fairly soon. Then item 4, the cost allocation, that's the same report that we spoke about earlier, so that's going out here pretty quick, if not out already. I think it actually already is out. The consultant's working on that. Item 5, the city to share tax revenues that are collected into the harbor fund that are not currently going there, such as TOT and others. I've got no new updates on that. Item 6. Eelgrass, that's obviously on the agenda tonight, so we'll be covering that in a little more detail tonight with Anchor QA's report on where they think we may be able to go on that. Item 7, incorporate working waterfront land area uses and general plan, local coastal plan update. As you know, we provided all our information to the GPAC, the General Plan Advisory Committee, which in turn will turn it over into the Planning Commission, so that process is still ongoing. I know I spoke to Scott Graham, the Community Development Director, earlier this week, and he had a meeting, I believe this week, with the Planning Commission to review sections of the general plan, local coastal plan program update, and they're slowly but surely making progress on that. So eventually we'll see that hopefully incorporated into those 2 plans. And then item 8, paid parking on the Embarcadero, nothing new to report there until Planning Commission or City Council takes that up. Any other questions? Comments?
Give me just a second. Okay. Lynn?
Yes, I have a question on an item not mentioned in your report, but recently, at the beginning of the month, I had a boat disabled on the Morro Bay Yacht Club dock, and we called for a tow, and when the Harbor Patrol fellows came over for this tow, it was the first time that I'd heard about it. I found out that you are now charging for towing in the bay and outside the bay, I presume. I can understand that this is probably to increase revenues, cost recovery, which I totally agree with, but I'm wondering how that was made known to the public, since this is, to me, a very drastic change in the policy and the procedures of the Harbor Department as it relates to disabled craft in the bay.
So that, you're correct, we are charging for tows when people need more than one tow in a 12-month period. So if it's any emergency, obviously that's an emergency.
How do you define emergency?
When somebody's person or property is in imminent danger of damage or injury or death.
Okay. And setting the fee, total cost recovery, the charge for this tow was going to be $380 to go from the yacht club dock to their mooring, which was right in front of the dock.
The fee is charged on, it's based on the cost of personnel in a boat for a minimum of an hour.
Okay. And how was this made known to the public?
It went through the master fee scheduling process when we did master fee scheduling.
Funny, I don't remember having heard of it at all.
So, and the policy is such that everybody gets one freebie per year, because we have historically had people that have abused the heck out of our towing services.
Totally understand.
And so you get one freebie a year, and then if you need more than that, then you're going to pay for it or find a commercial service, which Mr. Sanders possibly can do for you with California Marine
About
Salvage.
5 years ago, I suggested here at the Harbor Advisory Board that you start charging for towing, because I thought there was abuse at that time. And at that time, my suggestion was rejected. Nobody really agreed with me. So why did you make this change?
Because it was council directed.
Okay.
It came out of one, remember the management partners studies that looked at city services across departments and looked at Harbor Department. One of their recommendations was charge for towing services. And that was in, I think the original report was 2007 and they updated in 2012. And so council directed that out of the management partners. Because if you recall, under former city manager Dave Buckingham, we were the city was ticking off going through the management partner study item by item and looking at everything, and that was one of the ones that came up back in probably 2014 or 15, and it's something we should institute, and we did institute it, and now we're starting to charge for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it true that if you have vessel assist, if you're a member of vessel assist, where you can be recouped for part of that, or is that only if you work with a private party like Sanders or?
I believe, and I don't know for sure, but I believe if you have vessel assist and you need a tow from somewhere where you can't get vessel assist contracted services and you have to use somebody else, either an agency or a different towing service, I believe they reimburse you for that.
They
wouldn't
will
be sure.
They will review it and make a determination based upon circumstance, which means they will decide.
We'll probably find out soon.
Ron? Is there any way to change those minimum hour requirements to maybe half an hour? I mean, it only takes 30 minutes to take the boat over from the yacht club to a mooring, which is 100 feet away. Is there some way to say, hey, we'll give you 2 for 1 or something like that?
Well, at master fee schedule time, yeah.
Okay.
I think having such a drastic change in what people expect on the bay should have been in some way made known to the public in a much more obvious manner. I was very, very surprised that I'm the port captain for the the Morro Bay Yacht Club, and that I had not heard about that. It really surprised me. Thank you.
So between the Harbor Department and a spokesperson, an authorized spokesperson for the yacht club, let's discuss briefly what means we have to broadcast this policy to the public in a meaningful way. Any ideas? And I don't think just referring people to the master fee schedule that's published on the city's website is probably sufficient.
Well, our first, I guess, methodology is with somebody that needs a tow, and when we go to tow them, we advise them, hey, this one's free, next one's not going to be.
Okay?
So that's your, and if you were towed, 10 days ago, 20 days ago, 2 months ago, whatever, and you came to us and now we're charging for the tows, we're starting today, we tell you today. So that's what people have been advised, and we gave them a little information card and said,
No, that's a good
okay,
idea.
here's the first one, next one's,
That's a good idea. Do I recall correctly that there is some informational material that's available at the harbor office when people come into the bay? Do I remember that correctly, or is that not?
yeah, there's always, there's all the things hanging on our wall and in our front office that are available.
When someone checks in, a visitor checks in, for instance, do they get something, a piece of paper or a packet or something?
We get their registration and other billing and other information, and that's generally it, unless they ask for more, or their discussion leads down the path that it appears they need more information, like they ask about fishing or boating regulations or something, then we'll give them some handouts. But no, it's not normal to give them any kind of a packet. And most folks that just come into the bay that are visitors, we send them to the yacht club, because that's where you guys take most all the transients.
Including the disabled.
And Lynn, do you have, and I'm just springing this on you folks, but I think this is worthy of not a long discussion tonight, but worthy of consideration. Do you have any thoughts as to how to disseminate this information in a meaningful way to the public?
I think at the very least, it should have been in the monthly newsletter that goes out. I think since the yacht club is considered, or is the official host for transient yachts, that I should have been notified, or the yacht club should have been notified, not necessarily me personally, so that when we deal with disabled craft, which we do fairly frequently, we would know what to expect and how to advise them. At least those two methods for both, since we are sort of a major yachting organization in the Bay. And other than that, I would have put it in our masthead, put it on our alias so that all of our members know, and perhaps gotten something in the newspaper.
Okay,
I will get you a stack of information cards that we hand out. Those are also, we put all those cards, Laura reminded me, in all of our billing for all of our slip and boat people that we've sent out over the last few months.
Thank you.
Therese?
When you tow the vessel in the first time, do they sign any kind of waivers or any acknowledgments of your assisting them?
Nope. We just make note of it and keep a record of who we towed and when, which goes in our daily logs anyhow as well.
Okay. Well, if they did, I would suggest that you add that into it, so then they sign, and then you know that they have been given a document stating that they received a free tow, and that they know that the next one is that, and at least if they sign it, they're responsible for the reading of that.
Thank you.
Okay. Lynn?
One other thought occurs to me, and that is you have the big bulletin board down at Tidelands Park. And at the restrooms, I think there is another bulletin board. But at least a notice for the next year or so be on those bulletin boards that towing is no longer free, that there is one complimentary tow. And in a year or 2 years, then everybody will be very much aware of this policy, and we won't have to worry about it anymore.
That's a good idea. especially the one in Tidelands where folks from out of the area come in to launch. That's a good idea. Anything else before we move on? Okay, moving right along. Eric, anything else in your staff report?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you. So C1, do we have any public comment on C1, which is an update from the Marine Services Facility Boatyard Ad Hoc Committee on the committee's recent activities? Seeing no public comment. Dana?
Thank you, Chair. Well, as the Harbor Director had stated in the staff report, both items at City Council regarding the boat storage, along with the RFP for, or the funding for the RFP for feasibility study of the Marine Services Facility, were both approved. And so that's movement forward. We're glad to see that. The boat storage loan is part of the Marine Services Facility, so that is also making money for the city, which is what we want to do. I don't really have anything else to speak about at this moment, but I'll take any questions.
Gene? Peter? Lynn?
Only to mention that I know the Harbor Department, but as well, but Dana has done an awful lot of work on this, and I thank you for your doing all of that work and having it come to fruition, at least as far as this goes.
Thank you.
He occasionally reminds me how long he's been working on this. Can you remind me again?
We'll be coming up on 5 years at the end of this year.
And actually, a boatyard has been discussed on in this venue for the last 25 years.
28 years.
28 years,
I find a
I'm
record
correct.
going back 28 years. Yeah. Mark?
One quick question is it revenue from the Boatyard Harbor Department revenue or City General Fund?
TBD, to be determined. It would depend on what sort of form this whole yard took, and public, private, how the whole thing's operated. That's way down the line.
Good question. Cherise? No? Okay. Dana, anything else before we move on?
No, I guess not.
You're sure? Okay. C2. C2 is update from the Finance and Budget Ad Hoc Committee on the committee's recent activities. Any public comment? Seeing none, I can report that there's been no current activity. Eric, when do you think the department will begin to think budget? 18, 19 fiscal?
We'll start thinking in December, January, at mid-year time, and look at current and see where we're doing, and kind of start thinking about plotting and planning forward into next year. But we really start getting into department-wide activities in March, February, March. I suspect it'll be sooner than later this year with our new finance director. She's pretty on top of it and organized, and I'm pretty sure we'll have a pretty well-organized and clean process. So, yeah, February.
Okay, thanks. So Bill LaFay and Neil Maloney were both on that committee with myself, and they are no longer available, so I'm, Mr. Blackford, I'm hopeful that you'll be willing to serve on that committee.
I'd be honored to do so.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to C3. C3 is a report from the Eelgrass Ad Hoc Committee on many things, many pithy things. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. Lexi, do you want to make public comment, or do you just want to participate with Lynn? And
However you'd like me to do it.
I'm delighted that you're here. We are delighted that you're here, and I leave it to you and Lynn to orchestrate how you decide to do this.
Why don't you introduce it and let me know when I can be helpful?
I would hope, Lexi, that at any time you hear and want to make a comment during our regular discussion, that you would be at the dais and do so.
Okay, Lynn?
Okay, last month, we had the report from Anchor QEA, who did a background study to give us the framework for moving forward on forming a city policy for eelgrass management in the bay, in Morro Bay. The committee itself, consisting of Jean, Kathy Novak of Novak Consulting, Lexi Bell, Director of the National Estuary Program, Priya Verna of the Cal Poly Professor of Environmental Science and Resource Management is on this committee. And I must first of all express my appreciation for the depth of expertise, the broad experience that they bring to the discussions on this topic, because they certainly do, each and every one of them have a great deal to offer about eelgrass. And they've been very generous with their time and their knowledge. In general, the committee was quite pleased with the framework that was offered by QEA, and we would like to see it go forward, be presented to the City Council for approval. We did have a few changes and comments on some of the information in the framework. The first of which is among the regulatory agencies that are listed that have to be consulted or would be a part of permitting, not a permit, but allowing us to form the policy. The California Fish and Wildlife was not mentioned, and they, along with the Coastal Commission, Army Corps of Engineers, and the others have a part to play in that. So that should probably be added to that list of regulatory agencies.
You mean within the document?
Within the document, yes. Should be listed within the document of those agencies to be consulted. This framework depends to a great degree on the cooperation of the city and the National Estuary Program. And according to, per the next steps mentioned in the framework and the plan, we need to have an initial consult with both the city and the National Estuary Program to make sure they're on board before we spend too much time going forward or spending any more money on consulting fees. If those two organizations, if those two entities don't want to do this and are not on board, then there's no sense in going any further. The National Estuary Program has a huge role to play, and Lexi has put it on her agenda, being the director. It will be on their agenda for September 9th, that they will discuss this, and we will get some feedback from the National Estuary Program if they are on board to explore the possibility of them performing some of this work for the framework and to develop a more detailed plan. After that, on the 26th, we have a meeting scheduled, and we will discuss again what their outcome is. We also need to send this to City Council, send the framework, the conceptual plan and framework for it to City Council to make sure that we are going in a direction that City Council will support, and support fully, perhaps even to some degree financially. So those are some of the next steps. As far as the framework and the plan itself, there is a comment in the plan and the framework that says the amount of eelgrass in the bay is unchanged. This is from some surveys from NEP and others, that we've had a huge decline over the last 20 years. Since 2013 through current surveys, the amount of eelgrass has stabilized at about 15 acres. There is, Mr. Fowler has disputed that to a certain extent, but what is not stated in the conceptual plan is the distribution of eelgrass in the bay. We know, we can see that it's growing in the north end of the bay, but it is not recovering in the south, so that amount of eelgrass is, the distribution has changed, even though perhaps the amount that is mentioned in these surveys is not quite consistent with what one might see. And making that point is something that bothered Mr. Fowler. It is...
Why don't we take a moment and help, seeing as how we're discussing Mr. Fowler, why don't we let the public know who Mr. Fowler is,
Yes,
and what his interest is and what his background in this matter is, please.
He is a project proponent who developed some slips and docks in the bay, so he was responsible for doing eelgrass surveys and mitigation within his project.
He no longer has any financial, he doesn't have a dog in this show here. He's already paid for his surveys, he will continue to pay for his surveys, but he is not making, his comments are based on things that he sees now. But like I said, as in his letter, he has no interest in this other than information.
Right. Anything that is done will not affect him financially at all. He is offering his observations and information as he sees it, and offering it to the city to give more information on the topic. Nothing more.
On the basis of some pretty considerable involvement on his part relative to his own project.
Yes.
I mean, he was profoundly affected by this.
Yes, he was. As
I don't mean the plan, I mean by the
mitigation.
issue of eelgrass in the bay.
and the requirements by the regulatory agencies for eelgrass mitigation, eelgrass surveys, and trying to protect it from the effects of development. Now I'm confused. So, a clarification for the document that would be submitted to the NEP for their review and to the City Council is to note that the surveys have been done to the best possible standards. There may be discrepancies, and those discrepancies among surveys could be accounted for from a number of factors, including the technology used at the time of year that they were made. Okay. Another thing in the eelgrass plan that may need a little clarification is on number 5, paragraph 2. It calls for a detail about projects in the framework. The detail on the projects probably won't be able to be submitted immediately. We will have to rely in part or to a great extent on the NEP and the governing and the regulatory agencies to find out what kind of detail they want before that list can be made up and clarified to make it acceptable to all parties. Also in paragraph 5, in the conceptual plan, paragraph 5, the agencies will probably want a project to be included, or a pilot project to be identified as sort of, it's a pilot project to test whether or not this plan will actually work in Morro Bay, and to refine it further. And that project would hopefully be something that the city is already considering doing. I can't say what that would be, but something that they're already planning. It will not be something that is made up to serve the purpose, but that will have the additional purpose of refining our plan. And lastly, in the conceptual plan, it says that the city is to assist in funding. That funding may cause some anxiety among, citizens and the city council because of very, very tight revenues, but that funding or that support to the eelgrass plan may well be in a form of staff time or other resources and not necessarily a cash investment. Then we come to page 10 on the plan and the next steps, which I kind of went forward in the very beginning. The next step will be Lexi to meet and discuss with the NEP what we hope they will be able to do in performing on this plan, that we can get it on the city council agenda and be sure that the city council will be fully supportive of the plan, and then asking Anchor QEA. Then the next step after that will be to take it to the regulatory agencies and get their input as to if we're going in the right direction and doing what will be acceptable to them in order to streamline permitting processes for mitigation of eelgrass and getting the permits out, as well as hoping to make the whole mitigation process more productive and less costly to the proponents. And then assuming that we would need to talk to Anchor QEA to get an estimate as making this initial contact and canvassing the regulatory agencies to get the response to the framework. So, Jean?
Yeah, in a nutshell, a proponent needs to do some slip repairs or new docks or something like that on the water, and there may or may not be some eelgrass. Then the NEP, in conjunction with the city, the NEP would be the monitoring system who would review these things and help establish what eelgrass is there, how we can benefit, how we can mitigate out any loss of the eelgrass. And then the city, and they've mentioned the city several times, would be perhaps a co-applicant to it. And the city they keep mentioning, we believe will be the Morro Bay Harbor Department, not somebody sitting up in City Hall somewhere. And so basically that's how the plan is supposed to work. That's the framework. And Lexi, I'm sure you have some comments.
I have a request, and that is that between Ms. Bell and Lynn, and perhaps yourself, Jean, if somebody could take 2 minutes and to summarize the purpose of all this, because there are some folks who have not been following this. Why are we doing this? Aside from the fact that it was assigned to us by City Council.
Right. It was assigned to us, but it was assigned to us because permitting developmental projects on the waterfront along the Embarcadero is a complicated and costly process. There are several different agencies that have to issue permits to a developer to allow them to do whatever work it is they want to do. Whether it's building new slips, repairing the harbor walk, repairing revetments, even repairing buildings if they extend over the water. And this process of, there is, the state of California has a policy that says you shall attempt to avoid all impact on eelgrass, and if you do impact eelgrass, you must mitigate for that impact. The mitigation is extensive and costly. They first do a survey, a pre-project survey, and to see how much eelgrass is there. Just before construction, they have to do a pre-construction survey to see how much eelgrass is there and how much eelgrass they will affect. They have to do a post-construction survey of eelgrass to see how much they have affected or how much they have damaged, and they must then make up for the amount of eelgrass that has been damaged in their construction. Those surveys continue for 5 years.
Currently, the mitigation requires that no loss of any eelgrass, and you need to plant some more eelgrass to mitigate that out. But currently, because there's been so much loss of eelgrass in the bay, that they will not allow you to mitigate. So you're stuck in this circle and circle. You can't continue on. So there's several projects along the Embarcadero that cannot continue on until we figure out some way to mitigate out this loss of eelgrass. So that's why we're trying to come up with a plan that will enhance the eelgrass population and preserve it.
And satisfy any number of agencies.
Yes.
Yes.
Lexi? I know you can help us.
Hi, for those of you who haven't met before, I'm Lexi. I'm the Executive Director of the Morro Bay National Estuary Program. And in case you're not familiar with us, we are a local independent nonprofit in Morro Bay. We have this big long name, but we're actually a local nonprofit. The bay itself has a designation that comes from the Clean Water Act, that it's an estuary of national significance, and because it has that designation, then we're able to get some support and some grant funding to do work here in Morro Bay through collaboration with the community and other venues. So that's why I'm here. We do a lot of work on eelgrass. We've been monitoring eelgrass for a long time in the bay. So a couple things I thought might be helpful, and you can tell me if I'm going in the right direction. That's being helpful. We talked a little bit about monitoring, so I wanted to clarify what we do with monitoring. We, for a number of years, have done an aerial flight over the bay. So we actually hire a plane to come and fly over the bay and take these very high-resolution images that then they can analyze for what is underneath the water. And it's only in the intertidal zone, so only in the area that's exposed at low tide. And you have to fly under very specific conditions to get these images, and then they're classified so that we can tell how much of the bay is eelgrass and how much is mud flats, how much is algae, all different things that are in the bay. And so that's a very specific protocol that the contractor follows, and we do try to do that every 2 to 3 years. It's very expensive. We only have funding from grants and donations, so we have to fundraise for it every time we want to do it. It runs somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 a year time that we do that. So we did that a number of years prior to 2010. And then we try to do it again in 2013, but you have to have the right sun angle and tide height, and there can't be any fog, and there can't be any rain. So in 2013, we got completely skunked, and there was no any of those windows that we could actually fly the flight. So it went in the spring instead of in the fall. So it was entirely different time of year and different growing season for the eelgrass. Then in 2015, we didn't do the flight because based on our knowledge of the bay, being out in the bay, hearing from everybody in the community, there wasn't a huge upburst of tons of new eelgrass, and we didn't want to spend, $20,000 doing the flight to not see anything different. But we did have this unique opportunity that year to do a side scan sonar survey. So this is an entirely different kind of survey, the same kind that they use for some of the pre-project and pre-construction and post-construction surveys that Lynn mentioned. And this survey looks only at subtidal eelgrass. So this is eelgrass that grows underneath the water that's never exposed at low tide. And we don't have any mapping of subtidal eelgrass except for up in the harbor area where people might map it for a project, or the Army Corps might map it when they come in dredge. So in 2015, Merkel and Associates was here for the Army Corps, and we were able to, for a pretty affordable rate, have them just add on a couple days and do the back part of the bay so we could get a bay-wide subtidal map, but not comparable to the other maps because it's only subtidal. Then in 2017, we did another flight in December, so in the correct time frame that's comparable to other years, and we did the same aerial flight method, so the same method we used in 2010, and we got acreage of about 14.87, so still the same consistent amount of acreage that Lynn mentioned earlier. So we do have that data with a consistent method and a consistent time frame showing basically stagnation of the eelgrass with acreage over the whole bay. That data is, we're working on our report, and so it should be out within a couple weeks where people will be able to see that map and report on our website. So I just wanted to clarify those things. I know there's some of the things that they were talked about in Mr. Fowler's letter, and also just to explain what those different monitoring efforts are and how costly they are, and why, if we are to enter in this kind of framework, it will be a lot of effort to maintain something like that. So that is something that the board of directors for our organization has to discuss and agree upon. So I've been able to participate in the discussions and provide data and provide ideas, but I don't get to decide on my own. So we're going to talk about that, and my anticipation is that the board will have a number of questions that we'll have to explore how those things are going to work, and I think the agencies will be helpful in that because it really depends on the details. So if they want really specific projects in this framework, it's going to be harder for us to do that versus having more flexibility. What kinds of monitoring we need to do, those kinds of things I think will matter to how much the estuary program will be able to participate and in what roles we'll be able to participate. So we're discussing that in our next meeting. Is there anything else I should mention, Lynn?
So we have three players, as I understand it, potential players in this concept. In no particular order, we have the City of Morro Bay, the NEP, and a gaggle of agencies.
And project proponents.
Well, ultimately,
Right.
yes. So, concentrating on the first three, the next steps in the concept plan suggest an ordering, a critical path. I was listening to you very carefully, and it sounded like you might recommend a different ordering. That is, that NEP first decides whether it is in a position to participate in this, and then go to the agencies and see how particular they want to be in terms of projects, and then go to the city.
It really depends on how much detail you want when it goes to the city. So if it goes to city council and you want to know that NEP is going to do X, Y, Z, then we might want to have some discussions with the agencies and try to answer some of the questions that I'm anticipating that our board members might have. If it's enough to say to the city council, we've worked really hard on getting this idea together and we just want to get your buy-in on working on this idea, but we don't have the details yet, and we're going to come back with the details, then I think that's what we discussed in the meeting with the ad hoc committee, and then I think the order makes sense to go ahead and make sure the city says, yeah, keep doing this, you're going in the right direction, but we're going to work out the details as we talk to the agencies and work with the estuary program.
Well, given that the concept plan anticipates a partnership between the city and NEP, it seems to me, I mean, watching city council meetings for many, many months, it seems to me that if we collectively go to the city council, that we're going to have some quantification of their funding participation in order for them to think about it.
I could be wrong. I think part of our hesitation was that we might need to invest more in time with a consultant and ad hoc committee time and partner time to get those answers. And we've invested a lot, and we were nervous about continuing on that path and not knowing how much support we had. Is that right, Lynn?
Yeah, I understand. I think we all understand the time is money. I mean, that's clear, especially you folks. I mean, your time has a definite value, monetary value. But how would we respond? Let's suppose we sat down at this point. We have a conceptual plan. Let's suppose that we sat down with the city, whoever we is. That's not going to be me. It's going to be you folks, y'all. Sit down with the city and say, okay, here's what we have. Are you prepared to buy off on this, as you suggested? And how would we respond when council says, well, you want us to participate, and there's mention in your plan about us participating financially. How much is it going to cost us? What's the answer? Go ahead, Gene.
There's two answers to that.
Sure.
One is, if the city says, yeah, we think you're going in the right direction, then we will go back, our subcommittee will then go back to the various agencies and ask them, we will go back to Anchor and have them contact the various agencies and say, do you like where we're going? And if there's any questions that you want to get back to us, what will we need to do to continue on? And the consultant will then have to find out how much he would charge. They have to let us know how much they would charge to talk to these different agencies. Once we get that back in, and we get an approval from the city council to go ahead and contact these different agencies through Anchor, then we will know what we need to do. And then then we go into, say, a pilot program. And it should probably be a city facility, because that's not a proponent who's going to be making money on this thing one way or the other. Maybe the Anchor Street slits, something like that, that's going to be dealing with eelgrass, or Tidelands Dock, or the boat launch, whatever that deals with the eelgrass. We use that as a pilot program. And then from those information coming back from the different agencies, we will know, okay, we're going to have to deal with loss of eelgrass, how much we're going to monitor, things like that. We can't give you how much the city is going to cost the city. It's going to have to be in lieu fees, or not necessarily in lieu fee, but in kind fees, where we're going to provide boats for the survey. We're going to do some, whatever we do to help move this plan forward. Go ahead, Dana.
So it sounds like in the beginning, you're just asking the city, do you like our plan?
Exactly.
And you're not asking them,
Exactly.
this is what we're going to do and this is what it's going to cost,
Yeah.
until after you get the go-ahead, and then move on from there with Anchor.
To get some numbers
QEA.
back, just how much they're going to charge, to talk to these different agencies and ask them the question and see if there's a response back for what we need to do to satisfy them.
Lexi, is NEP in a position to participate in the agency contact?
I'll find out on Sunday, but I hope so. I think my best guess is that we will have we'll want to know a little bit more about what all these rules mean. And there may be some things we can do and some things we can't do, but we will want to participate in some fashion, and probably a lot of that is dealing with the agencies to figure out what all the details are. So I think one of the concerns for the ESHRE program is that we are a nonprofit, we're not a regulatory entity, we don't tell anybody what to do now, we have no intention of ever telling anybody what to do, so we don't want to put ourselves in a position within this framework where we start to do that. So I think that's one thing we'll have to work out with the details of the plan, how we can be a resource for the information that's necessary for the plan, and be a supportive partner and not be turning into a stand-in for a regulatory agency. So I think that requires some discussion with the agencies and understanding. So there's only been 2 of these comprehensive eelgrass management plans done in the state, I think, or at least 2 that we talked about at the meetings, Humboldt and Newport, and they're both very different, both in their eelgrass problems and in what their plans look like. They're both very different from each other, and they're both very different than what we're proposing to do. So I just think there's a lot of unknowns about what that looks like, and that's what we need to work on with discussing with the agencies, what they're looking for.
This may not be a fair question, and you don't have to answer it. Given your participation on the committee, is it correct that NEP is comfortable with the plan as proposed by Anchor QEA?
I think it's correct that I have supported the process and participated and provided information and feel like it's a good idea, but I haven't had anything to ask the board about, so I can't say that for the organization.
Understood.
But I think we've had a really good process. I think Anchor did a great job coming up with something that is possible for Morro Bay, but it's just the first step. There's all these details to understand how this would work in practice, because each of these management plans are so different, and they're addressing very different. The whole idea of them, as I understand from the California eelgrass mitigation policy, is that these plans provide an opportunity to address unique situations, so they're all justifiably unique.
You mean in terms of their area?
Right, and in terms of even how they're used. So in Newport, they're used to really streamline the monitoring efforts, because a lot of their projects are at residential level. And in Humboldt, their plan doesn't really address really much except the state of knowledge about eelgrass. So it doesn't really have anything that guides mitigation. So they're just very different. And we're proposing something that is
More active?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were talking about the photographs, you used the word classified.
Mm-hmm.
And lest there be any confusion about what that word means in that context, what does it mean in that context?
So there's methods where these photographs, or these images, they're multispectral images. They have color related to light refraction. And so different substrates reflect light differently, and over lots of data collection and time, they've developed these classifications where if you're seeing a certain light refraction, it's likely to be eelgrass, and if you're seeing a different one, then it's likely to be mud flats, and if you're seeing a different one, it's likely to be a type of algae. So they have these classifications where, depending on the data that the picture shows, they can determine whether what's in the picture is all of these different things. And so it's a standardized method that's been tried in many different places and very robust, versus just taking a picture, like a high quality resolution regular photograph, and just looking at it with your eye and saying that looks like eelgrass to me, but your eye might see that eelgrass differently than someone else's eye, and so someone else might say, that doesn't look like eelgrass to me, that looks like algae to me. So classification is a standardized way of making that assessment of these images. And then once they're assessed, the contractor uses their algorithms and such to do that assessment, and then they send us some ground truthing questions. So they send it to us and say, we think this is eelgrass in these 5 spots. According to our classification, can you go out on the kayak with a GPS and make sure that that really is eelgrass in that spot? So we verify that their classification system has worked correctly in a certain number of spots. And so that's how the method works. Is that
Perfect.
helpful? Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
Sometimes I get too much into the
And-
science.
Interesting weeds in this case.
Right? That's right. They
yeah.
are weeds, kind of, yes.
Okay, so committee, what do you want us to do?
I think we want Eric to get us on the agenda, possibly for December, for City Council to present the conceptual plan with the framework, and for probably a very brief presentation, and see if they indeed are willing to back this and tell us to continue working on it. We will get the information from Lexi and from the NEP and be able to present that. Hopefully it will be positive, and we will add that to our report to the City Council to let them look at that. And if we have that kind of backing, that might be an incentive for them to also say, go ahead and continue. Get an estimate from Anchor QEA as to time and budget for having QEA representatives contact the regulatory agencies with the conceptual plan and framework, and see if they also agree that this is a good way to go, and to continue with it if they're willing to help us, and if they ultimately see a positive outcome.
Wow.
Being the policy.
Councilman Makowiecki, did that sound like an appropriate path for us to take?
Yes.
Thank you.
Would you like me to speak to that, or?
I'd love to have you speak to it. I just didn't want to put you in a spot, that's all.
In terms of looking at the plan, coming at it from my point of view as city council, in terms of the work we're doing for the harbor board, having a clear focus for the eelgrass situation in the bay, there's a number of fronts. It is, as a number of you brought up, in terms of various building projects on the bay, but however, a healthy bay is very integral to what we all do in the city writ large, and there's a lot of different players there. So having this policy is very necessary to have, not just to be the development on the lease sites that the city has, but so many just having a functional bay and then understanding where it fits into it. So in terms of the sooner and all the work that you've been doing, Lynn, over the number of years, this is, as it builds, if we can have a clear plan, knowing that there's not a lot of other players, if it's just Newport and Humboldt that has this. If we have it going forward, this is just so helpful to what we do as a city. So please bring it to us, and I know just from, being your liaison, yeah, I'm interested in it, but however, I think it's necessary on a number of fronts. So yes, let's do it.
Thank you.
Can I jump in and add something? Or I wrote some notes here on my margin as you guys were discussing how to move forward, and obviously there's a lot of unknowns with costs and process. NEP's meeting Sunday. I think Lexi's bringing them sort of conceptually. Here's the framework. Knowing there's a lot of costs and a lot of unknowns, they can't unequivocally say, yeah, we're in. But I think they can say they're in conceptually, pending further input and developments. If NEP says they're in, we then take that to the city council and say the NEP is conceptually in. Is the city council conceptually in? assuming the city council says yes, we want to continue forward with this, knowing there's still a lot more we need to investigate, then I think we can get Anchor QEA on relatively inexpensively, meaning not thousands of dollars, to do the regulatory agency dance, and at least go to the regulatory agencies with this framework and say, hey, is this something you guys will consider and buy off on? And their answer is either going to be yes, no, or maybe there's not enough information. Hopefully it's a yes or a no, and if it's a yes, then we go and say to Anchor, okay, give us a proposal to prosecute this process, to run it through from start to finish. And they give us a proposal that's got a dollar amount to it, probably a lot more detail on what all the stakeholder and input and participation is going to be, get proposals back, and then we bring that back to the city council with the NEP weighing in on it as well and saying, okay, here's the price tag. Unless I'll just make up a number out of the blue, $60,000. It's going to cost us $60,000 in consultant fees to get to there. And Anchor comes up with conceptual costs of what it might take in terms of the NEP's costs and involvement. And NEP can decide whether or not they want to participate in that. Assuming these are all continue to move forward things, we get the Anchor QEA on contract, and then they start down that process. Basically what we just outlined here, but I think I put an extra step in there of go to NEP says yes conceptually, go to council says yes conceptually, then we go to the agencies, like I say, relatively quick and cheaply, and find out if they're even willing to entertain this. And then if yes, then we go to Anchor for the full proposal to do the full project and get that in front of the council, because then at least for the city standpoint, the council's then going to have a price tag that it's going to cost to move through the process. And hopefully NEP, there'll be enough information at that point from NEP to be able to tell whether they can still stay on board and stay involved. That make any sense?
I think that's what we're saying. The one thing I want to say, though, about the cost of this, if we look toward the end game, what we're actually looking for is, in a way, to save money, ultimately. The project proponents are spending a lot of money doing surveys and mitigation. Hopefully you can combine all of those. Having NEP actually do the survey, but the project proponents would be paying into somehow a fund. And so NEP would end up with more funds to do more surveys. Those surveys could be used in the project planning for the individual projects around. And so the money does get used in a more beneficial manner. The mitigation projects that would go on, NEP has lots of experience in planting eelgrass and monitoring eelgrass. The project proponents would buy into some of those processes, the mitigation that NEP is already doing. And hopefully that would give a better result for the mitigation. NEP would get more money in order to be able to do more. I don't know if that's the way it'll work out, but that's sort of how we see it going round and round.
When you go to council, I think just as relevant is the point that the waterfront is one of the principal economic engines of the city. And I don't know that council needs to be reminded, but it doesn't hurt to point out to them that an economically healthy waterfront produces significant revenue for the city. So a little outlay on the front end might be chicken feed to the ultimate benefit, economic benefit.
It also provides enhancing the eelgrass. I mean, that's the bottom line, is we want to protect and
That's what
create more eelgrass.
That's what Councilman Makowetsky addressed. So so we definitely, and that's a good point that Matt made. The conceptual plan doesn't address that point directly.
No, it does not.
And so that would be something that I would suggest be put in as, at least as an editorial comment. by the consultant.
The first paragraph, I think, of,
Well, that's okay.
Does
We
say
need,
something,
we need to roll
right.
on here, so.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on this?
I just, listening to all this, I just see that this kind of is leading towards the cost being reimbursed through development fees in a way. I mean, whether it's a bank with the NEP or if it's a bank or development fees on the other end to the city for what could be pretty much more reasonable than what they're spending now. So it kind of looks, I mean, the picture I see is kind of a win-win-win for everybody involved. So I think this is a good plan.
Okay, anything else on this topic? If not, we're moving on down the road. Lexi, thank you. Thank you for being here this evening. Yeah, anything you want to add before we move on? Are you sure? Okay, thanks.
Before we move on, does the HAB want to make any sort of recommendation about this? Or we just got consensus based and we're good to move forward?
I think it's a little premature right now.
Okay.
Until NEP decides what they're going to do. I mean, that's why I didn't ask for anybody to for a motion, because I'm not sure it would get us where we need to go. But in the next meeting, ma'am?
if we want to get it onto a city council agenda before January,
Oh,
I
that's a good point.
don't know how long that takes, but we might be putting it off too long.
Matt, you have a suggestion? If we made a formal recommendation to council in the October meeting,
Or even December?
no,
November,
we're not going to
December?
know. We're not going to wait that long. NEP's going to have their board meeting, and we're going to know which way we're going.
Before, well, a suggestion I could make, I would think Eric looking at the various agenda items coming up and seeing, and then working with city manager and how the meetings are set up, because I know we're going to have a busy fall. And so I would kind of put it towards Eric and city manager, because I agree, Lynn, if you put it on that, although that December, if you did do it on December, in terms of the goals being set in January and February, looking at the year's actions that council and staff will be doing, that could time-wise be appropriate. But then before making any decisions, you could just, ask Eric to look into it with staff just to make sure.
Thank you.
Timing-wise, so there's one meeting in December unless special meetings are called, which is a possibility, but you've got the schedule, I don't want to steal that. And one meeting in November, again, unless special meetings are called, which are a possibility, but not for sure. So the meetings in October are October 9th, so we wouldn't be able to get anything on that agenda because the HAB meeting would be the week before, and staff reports are already written and probably posted by then. The agenda's probably posted like that, so that really makes October 23rd the next chance we could get in front of the city council.
How about this? How about if the committee monitors NEP's determination in its board meeting that's coming up in just a few days, and if there is positive direction relative to the conceptual plan, that the committee communicates that to you immediately, which would give you an opportunity then to go to Mr. Collins.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we just moved to do that. Good. Yeah, okay, good, thanks, great. Okay, now are we ready to move on? Aye, good, okay. Lexi, thank you. Okay, so now C4, I gotta dig here, give me a second. So C4 is input on the Harbor Department Lease Management Policy Update Process and nomination of 2 Harbor Advisory Board members to serve on a lease management policy update group. I think we've taken care of the last part of that. Is there any public comment on C4? Seeing none. Director?
Thank you. So, lease management policy update has been a council goal item for a couple of years now, and we're finally rolling around to getting some forward progress on it. I'm a little bit ahead of the process because we're taking it to council for the council's input on a process that we've outlined and possible participation of committees or stakeholder input. That'll be going next week on September 11th. But knowing that time is of the essence, we'd like to get something in place before this council changes. Timing and waiting for the next Harbor Advisory Board meeting, depending on what the council input is next week, would be a little too late. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of the council, but I'm feeling okay with that. So basically, we've got the existing lease management policy that was created about 18 years ago to provide a little bit of guidance for the city council and the city management to manage the city's title leases. It took existing policy and integrated it into a framework to both, enhance the public's understanding and leaseholders' understanding of what's going on, but also the city's understanding, and provide some consistency throughout the years. I kind of classify it as a mission statement. While it does have some do's and don'ts and wills and won'ts in it, it's mostly sort of a guidance document. It doesn't have a lot of detail on how you pursue some of the issues that we pursue on a regular basis when it comes to the leasing on our Tidelands Trust. So at this point, what I want to put in front of the Harbor Advisory Board, assuming you've looked at the policy itself, my idea of moving this policy forward into a revision is retain the core document. I would rewrite it in a slightly different order and format just because that's me, and I wouldn't have written it the same way, but retain the same existing format. We've got an overarching policy, which is the LMP, and then attached to that, which you'll see on page 2 of the staff report, is items A through M. Sort of, those are the areas that are want for more information in the current LMP, and I'll just use lease site audits. Our leases say that we'll audit, our lease policy says we'll audit our leases for % gross payment compliance. In other words, make sure our lessees are paying what they should be paying every 5 years. And that's all it says. It doesn't say how you go about it, how you choose the lessees you're going to audit, what sort of information you're looking for. And so that sort of area would be an area that would be a good candidate for what I call either a directive or an implementation document that would be part of the lease management policy that would spell out in more detail how those things work. Same thing with lease site maintenance and inspections and how well maintained the lease sites are staying under the leaseholders and how we inspect that. Again, all these items A through M, being a good bureaucrat, I look at the work of other agencies and make sure I don't repeat what people have already done if there's already good stuff in place. And we've looked at the policies and procedures from multiple other agencies, much bigger ones and much more well-heeled ones that have whole departments and staffs of double-digit people that do nothing but lease management. So Port of LA is one of them. So I kind of stole this idea from them and from the Port of San Diego. So what I want to get from the Harbor Advisory Board tonight is two things. One, some input on this list of items. These two implementation, what they call them, implementation documents or directive documents, and make sure that's the kind of right-looking lease that we're looking at for these more detailed documents. And two Harbor Advisory Board members to serve on some sort of a committee or stakeholder group, depending on what direction the council wants to go with it next week, to help out in this policy update effort. What I'm putting in front of the council is a couple of options. One is a ad hoc committee of a couple of council members, a couple Harbor Advisory Board members, and a couple of leaseholders to sit on a group to advise staff on how we update this framework, and also another group that could be a little less formally organized, made up of different potential leaseholders and others that could advise the group. So I'll be putting that in front of the council next week, and we'll have a little more idea. So again, I wanted to get two Harbor Advisory Board members at least on the hook at this point to serve on whatever sort of body we end up going forward with. So again, on the items A through M, just looking, is this a good list, and any general input regarding those areas, what we might want to consider in those areas. Again, I'll use the percent gross auditing. Is there any particular things we want to consider? Maybe look at it from the standpoint of the parking, paid parking we did a few months back, where while we did recommend going forward with some sort of paid parking, what we really recommended as a board was, hey, if you're going to go forward with paid parking, here's the laundry list of items you need to consider as a city. And so maybe thinking along those lines, if there's a laundry list of things that could be considered under these items, that's the kind of input I'm looking for tonight.
So I'm slightly confused. Are you looking for this evening for the Harbor Advisory Board to provide you with substantive commentary on the existing 2001 Harbor Department lease management policy and your list of A through M? Or are you, would you like to move straight into us identifying a couple of us, seeing as how you've explained the mission very clearly, to participate in that mission?
Negative to going into the lease management policy itself and starting to pick that apart? No, that's going to be the stakeholder or ad hoc group when we move forward with that. Yes, on items A through M, again, what I'm looking for, and I've gone through, where this list came from is looking at the existing lease management policy, and what I as staff feel are areas that warrant either a directive or an implementation document, which would be a side document to the policy that would spell out in more detail the item that it's focusing on. So what I'm looking for the HAB tonight is this a good list? Any general input on that list in terms of, here's things to consider if you're going to, implement on these items, and then the yes to the 2 Harbor Advisory Board members.
Okay, and before we poll, just a little clarification. Item M, determining approved uses, you're talking about in terms of the use permit, is that correct?
The approved uses on the site.
But those get baked in to a lease on the basis of a particular named document, do they not?
They get baked into 2 places. They get baked into the lease, and they get baked into whatever the operative permits are, the conditional use permits or different permits that are on the site that the Community Development Department deals with.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make clear that, for my information, if no one else's, that when it says determining approved uses, that's ultimately that becomes a directive for the lessee.
Correct. I guess maybe a better way to word that one would be a process by which approved uses are determined, not determining the approved uses necessarily in and of itself.
Thank you.
Does that make more sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so A through M, commentary. Gene?
I'll wait until what else I hear from the board.
Okay, Peter?
No comment.
Lynn?
I'm still thinking.
Okay. Mark?
I'll hold.
Okay, Dana?
Well, my first inclination is to agree with staff just because they are the professionals and they've been working at this. And as I look down this list, personally, I don't see anything that is blaring that I would dispute, that's for sure.
How about anything missing?
I think I would have to look at it, think about that longer.
Okay. Sharice?
I guess I have some questions in regard to the determining rates and the sources that you use. So if we're going to discuss that, Port of San Diego, do they own the buildings or do they build the buildings? Or do they have the tenants, lessees, build the buildings?
I think they've got a combination. They've got, it's hundreds of acres. And many, many leaseholds of a lot greater size than what we have.
Can you clarify F a little bit, establishing fair market rent? Do you mean conceptually, what sort of formulations should apply, or do you mean something very much more specific? What do you have in mind?
So as far as F goes, and what I'm looking for tonight from the HAB, I'm not looking for how do we establish fair market rent and that kind of input. I'm looking for, is that something that we need? The lease policy says leases shall be at the, shall be charged fair market rent. Well, how do we determine fair market rent? We don't have any process or procedure to do that. So is that an item that's fair game for having a more detailed document on? I don't need input on how to establish fair market rent at this point. I'm just looking for, is that an item that needs a policy and procedure in and of itself to implement?
Yeah, you've used.
Does that help?
Yes, you added the word implementation, and that certainly helped me as it relates to all of these items.
Yeah, look at them all along those lines.
Sharice, did that address what you had on your mind?
In a way, I think that there's a deeper way to look into it, and I believe that all of these are important parts to look at the implementation and change for future
Do you see
lease.
anything on the list that you don't think is appropriate?
No.
Do you see?
I believe that it's all there. I would just get into each one.
Sure, of course. And would you suggest we add anything? A category, an element?
I would just want it to be any of these that are going to be looked at, that they're looked at as similar situations. So in cases where there's different scenarios in different towns, that it's just not one blanketed percentage. There's different types of buildings. Make this sound better. It just needs to be looked at from the same perspective based on the same similar situations. So if I was going to add anything, it would be that the leases are looked at from the perspective of how much the city has involvement in that building or property.
Well, the city has no involvement in any of the buildings because their only involvement is the title and trust dirt or water.
Right. In some of these coastal towns, the buildings are actually owned by the properties, actually, not just the dirt.
I see.
It's actually the property, and the business, the leaseholders just supply the FFE. So if you're going to base your percentages on something that has to happen with that particular item, then you need to look at it from that perspective. If it's something where the master leaseholder built the entire part and is only the dirt is associated with a percentage, that should be looked at in that perspective.
I guess maybe I'll jump in and help you or maybe clarify. Maybe an item N then is ground leases versus building leases.
Correct.
The ground leases, we own the dirt, and leaseholders do all the development and own it. Building leases, we own the building, we maintain it, and we basically a property manager at that point. So it sounds like maybe an N is ground leases versus building leases. We do have in the lease management policy percent rent schedules for each, even though we don't have any building leases at this point. We're all ground leases.
D'Estacio's, was that a situation where?
That's not.
That's not
title and trust.
Titles, yeah. That is a building lease.
Yeah,
That's
the only
not
land,
ours.
the only land that this body's in a position to consider is the land that is immediately west of the sidewalk, the west sidewalk on Embarcadero.
Okay.
It's give or take, but everything else is city property. So,
Okay, that answers that.
sure. Okay, Gene?
So clarify, if somebody builds a new building on a lease site, does the city own the building, or does whoever built it own the building?
Whoever builds it on the building.
once the
Leaseholder
building-
owns the improvements. At the end of the lease, typically leaseholders either redevelop or sell to somebody that redevelops at the end of the lease, and it perpetuates on. At the end of the leaseholder has the option to remove their improvements. Obviously, I've never seen anybody pick up their building and take it away. And the lease stipulates that if the leaseholder doesn't pick up their building and take it away, it reverts to the city. If the city doesn't want the building, the city, in most of our leases, has the option to require the leaseholder to take it away.
That's what I thought.
Eric, the traditional 8% of appraised land value base, does that or does that not apply to a water lease?
It applies to both. There's,
Should that be a third category that would be looked at, or not?
well, as far as fair market rent,
Well, you said ground leases versus building leases, should there be versus water lease?
well, the water lease, so each lease is, just for everybody's edification, each lease site has got two components, a land component and a water component. The land component stops at about the top of the rock revetment, and so the water component extends from there on out, usually out 50 feet, sometimes further, even though there's a part of it that's obviously not water because you've got the rock revetment, but that's the water lease. The land lease gets an appraised value, and the lease's base minimum rent is 8% of that appraised value of the dirt, unimproved. The water lease is appraised in the same manner, that it's got nothing built on it. It's just the value of the ground, even though it's technically not ground, it's mostly water. So they're both appraised under the same scheme, so to speak, as an appraised value, and so I think it's already covered in existing practice.
Okay. Okay. Gene?
Well, now that you opened up the ballgame and talking about number N, you mentioned ground lease and building lease, but under building lease, you have moorings and slips, and I'm just trying to figure out what moorings and buildings are underground or on the ground. Is that clear? Are you clear on my question?
No.
Okay. Never mind.
So a ground lease is a lease of just that, the ground, and the leaseholder comes in and builds everything, including Morro Bay Marina. Morro Bay Marina's water lease out there in the bay that has moorings.
Or
We're
another-
just leasing them the water.
Or another way to say it is sans improvements. There's no improvements of any kind.
Correct.
Okay, so on your ground lease, you want to charge 10% for a mooring and the slip. But under a building, you want to charge 20% for a slip or a mooring. And I just don't understand of any moorings that are
Those
built on the
percent
ground.
rates are
for
different like
buildings.
that because under a building lease, we own the building, we've built it, we pay for it, we maintain it, and therefore we're just charging you as a renter of space now instead of being a property owner.
Okay.
That make sense? That's why those percents are different. They're just about double in most cases.
Go ahead, Gene.
One other general question. In the very beginning, we talk about the waterfront management plan, and you talk quite a bit about the city manager. Is he going to be taking over any of these lease negotiations, or is it still in you still the master lease negotiator?
I don't anticipate that's going to change.
Okay, I'm just,
The city manager's got an integral part, as does the city attorney, and sometimes the finance director, but it's generally the harbor director and city attorney doing the lion's share of the work, and the city manager weighing in as needed.
my comment is because they're so variable on the waterfront, and it takes somebody who knows the waterfront to make those decisions on lease management policy. I would hate to see that happening uptown.
Okay,
So that would fall into, I'm trying to read into your mind where you're wanting to go with that. I think that fits into A, well, not A, that would fit into D, lease renewal and extension process procedure and new lease negotiations. And assuming we put a document together that spells out how we do lease negotiations, that document's going to say, the harbor director does this, and, it's touched on in the existing policy, but there's no real detail, and I think that's where that would live.
Okay, any other general questions before we talk about identifying the two people? Okay, well, just to ask the obvious, Sharice, are you willing to be one of the two people? Great, thanks. And who else on the board would like to be the second person? Who are you pointing at?
Mark?
I'd be happy to serve.
Okay. Do you have a background with building and land leases?
Following my undergraduate degree, while I was going to law school, I was a real estate agent and a loan officer for about a decade.
Okay. Okay. All righty. There you go, Mr. Director.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on this agenda item? Okay, we're moving on. So that's C5, oral update and question/answer on status of lease sites 37W, 6970/69W-70W, and 90/90W. First one is otherwise known as Myers Morro Bay Marina, the second is the Morro Bay Aquarium site, and the third is Otter Rock Cafe. So, Eric?
And the fourth is United States Coast Guard.
Oh, sorry, thanks. There's a fourth one, thank you.
So these were 4 lease sites that we wanted a little more information and Q&A on. As you recall, a couple of months ago, I think a couple of meetings ago, we ran down the list of sort of leases in flux and process and projects and other initiatives we were undergoing in terms of capital projects. And these were 4 that we wanted a little more detail on. So what I've got on the staff report is our basic lease information. That's publicly available if you want to look at it. It's the basic roundup of the lease. We don't put the percent rents on there because that's like sales tax. That's more of a proprietary information for the property owners that doesn't generally get out to the public. So there's the basic information. I'll just go through them one by one. Lease site 37W, that's Myers Morro Bay Marina, otherwise known as the boatyard that we spoke about earlier down at the south end. It's a water-only lease, although there's a small sliver of land that the property line actually does go through. We own a little bit of the bulkhead there. That lease is on holdover right now. It's been on holdover for a couple of years. I think it expired in 2016. The Myers were and still are interested, although we've heard rumors lately that the boatyard may be closing. I think Joe, the operator there, is wanting to get out of the business and move on. But the Myers, I've had recent contact with another family member, and they are still interested in operating the boatyard in some shape or form. They've got some concerns with the machinery, and they think it may need to be replaced at some point. As you know, that yard used to swing boats both to the south and the north. It lost its ability to move to the south when that property owner next door made some property changes. And so the machine's design isn't good for swinging both directions anymore because it doesn't have the opportunity to the south. So they believe if they're going to continue to operate as a boatyard, they need to move it, which obviously means replacing it because you're really not going to move that machine the way it's built into the, with its supports built into the hillsides next to it or into the structures next to it. So they think they need to move it to put it on one side of the property or the other so that it can access the whole property. And that's obviously a pretty big investment. The city's interest in that yard has obviously been in keeping it in operation, but I've always been kind of on both sides of a fence in that we've been pursuing our own boatyard effort, and if a boatyard comes to fruition, a full-service boatyard comes to fruition in the Triangle lot, we're going to need every boat we can get, including everything that goes to the Myers yard, and we'd essentially be probably putting them out of business. And so how to justify sending them down a path of major expense and redevelopment, knowing that we may thwart their efforts with our own yard, has always been sort of a troublesome thing for me to juggle. And so we'll see where our yard efforts go, and that'll hopefully get some direction here in the next 4 to 6 months. In the meantime, the Myers are still researching, the cost to do that. The other ask that we had as a city for the Myers to continue operating was that boatyard became fully environmentally compliant with all the latest best management practices and containment and everything else. And where we pointed them for that was to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, because they would be the main regulator overseeing that with the stormwater discharge permit, because every industrial operator that has the potential to pollute the waters of California has to get a Regional Water Quality Control Board permit. They made some initial contacts at the Regional Water Board, and the initial reaction from the Water Board was they didn't think they needed any permit, and that didn't add up to me based on every other boatyard I know about up and down the coast that's under the Regional Board's purview. So they're redoubling their efforts. I'm going to work through our city staff up at Community Development to see what truly a boatyard would need to operate. So we're still on holdover. The Myers, again, they're interested potentially in operating the yard. Obviously, there's going to be a big cost to that with not a lot of return over a moderate period of time. It's going to take a long time to recoup that, so they'd probably be looking at some sort of a lease concession. It's about, 15, 18 slips, so it's not a big money maker for them out there. So that's kind of where we are in the negotiation standpoint with them. Kind of waiting to see where our financial feasibility study goes and where we may go with our own boatyard or not. And then we're also going to be putting out an RFP for the property to the south. That's in front of the Martini-owned private land up above, and the Chrysler lease site, which is the small little 4-boat mini marina between the Martini property and Bayfront Marina, and putting those out to public bid for operation of those, and seeing if the Myers may be interested in moving some slips, additional slips over into those properties as well. So that's where I am on that.
Questions? Sharice? Dana?
No.
Mark?
Not at this time.
Lynn?
The rumor around town is that the boatyard will close down as of the end of October. Since the uses would no longer include boat repair, would it change to not the market value, but the amount that they have to pay in rental is different with slips as compared to boat repair? Would it go to the straight slip fee schedule?
Currently, their rent, there's like I said, there's 15 odd slips there. They don't, and Lori can kick me if I'm wrong, but they don't pay any percent gross rent there because they don't generate enough revenue to overcome their minimum rent. But their percent gross rent is only attributable to their slips. We don't account for the boatyard because that's on private property. We've never accounted for the boatyard. It's just been the slip revenue.
Oh.
It's not titled as trust land.
Yeah, all those lease sites, remember, are private property above the bulkhead or high tide line.
Okay. Thank you.
Peter?
No comment.
Gene?
Yeah, Bill Martini was asking about the 4 slips down there, used to be Gladys's. When did they come up for request for proposals?
I got to get that request proposals together and out on the street. That's what I'm attempting to do. That's
Okay.
I'm trying to get it out within the next 30 to 45 days.
Just curious, thanks.
Yeah.
If you know, when was the last time that stiff leg was certified?
No idea.
That's why I asked the question.
Don't know.
Okay. Okay, next, please.
Okay. 6970 Morro Bay Aquarium. Lease expires the end of this month. It's on the old Pipkin lease format. Currently working with Central Coast Aquarium's new executive director, Christine Johnson, on their proposal. They are still intending to occupy that site and rebuild a new aquarium there, redevelop a new aquarium there. They're currently on their first phase of financial feasibility study, which is looking at the demand and potential, not the financial feasibility of their proposal per se, but the demand and viability of an aquarium and visitorship of an aquarium, estimated visitorship of an aquarium of the size that they're anticipating here in Morro Bay.
For what purpose? The USDA or their own purposes?
For the USDA, they've got a $20 million loan tentatively approved from USDA, but they first have to do full financial feasibility study and a couple other studies, I believe probably CEQA and a couple others. But financial feasibility is obviously the big number one, because if it's not financially feasible, you don't go bother doing all the other work. So they've got a consultant firm on board that's working on phase one right now, which is again the sort of the visitorship and viability and demand for such an aquarium here in Morro Bay. And then they're doing fundraising right now, apparently having some pretty good success. They've been canvassing our waterfront and getting some good participation from our waterfront leaseholders. They need to raise a total of about $30,000 for that. The city donated $10,000 a couple of years ago. They've reportedly got about 10, maybe 12,000 generated now, and they're on their last efforts. I think this Saturday they've got a big fundraiser going out at the Avila Pier. So they're hoping to raise that last $8,000 to $10,000 in the next few months to keep that feasibility study going. And assuming it pencils in the positive, we'll be working with them and through the city council and probably in closed session and have them present business plan, and at some point we'll bring it to regular session in council. Once they do their financial feasibility, I'm assuming it pencils positive, they'll put together their business plan and their full proposal on how they're going to move forward with the USDA loan and whatnot, and we'll take that to council for consideration of consent to landowner for them to pursue that process.
So did I just understand that the $40,000 feasibility study that is required of the CCA by the USDA as part of their loan application packet, that they're spending the $10,000 that they got from the city of Morro Bay, and they have another 10 to 12, which was reported by their executive director 5 weeks ago, and they're attempting to raise the balance of that. But meanwhile, they're spending the 10K from city of Morro Bay. Is that correct? To your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I don't know exactly which of the $10,000 bills they're spending, of the $20,000 bills they have in their hands.
Sure.
They're spending.
Sure. Okay.
And so come end of September, when the Tylers vacate, Central Coast Aquarium, and they're going to their board of directors as well, much like the NEP has done. But tentatively, they're going to try and occupy just the front lower stairs portion on a not 7-day-a-week basis necessarily, but on a lesser time basis, with a gift shop, some touch tanks, and information to get a presence established to begin and to continue on with their, as they continue on with their fundraising and their efforts, they want to get a presence established. And so we'll be going to council next week in closed session on this and a bunch of other lease items to see where the council is on that.
Is that it for that one? If so, I'll poll the board.
Yes.
Okay. Therese, questions, comments on this particular site? Dana? Mark?
Generally, on the ground lease and the water lease, what would be your opinion of what the appraised value would be, and what would be the income from an 8% land lease on that site?
Making me do math in public. Well, I'm going to, because I have some
Round
data.
numbers are fine.
I actually have some numbers in my head. At current appraised rates, approximately, based on the square footage of the land and water sections of the lease, one would expect about, and you got to give me a minute here, because I do have the data I need. One could expect about a $24,000 a year lease at 8% of appraised value.
Thank you.
Current, well, you've got on your staff report, the current lease, which is based on a 1993 appraisal. The Pipkin leases had initial rent amount, then they reappraised the property once in 1993. They started in '68, and so based on CPI adjustments since then, it's up to just over 18,000 right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lynn? Peter?
Nothing.
Gene?
In closed session, is it possible for somebody else to make a request for proposal for that lease site besides Central Coast Aquarium people? I mean, are you going to put it out to bid for somebody else who can generate more money than a nominal fee of $1?
We don't, at this point, have direction to put it back out to bid. We're still working with CCA, Central Coast Aquarium. And a nominal dollar, I mean, that was a proposal under a different executive director from the aquarium, under a different city manager, and always subject to negotiation. So really they've done their own in-house financial feasibility to have gotten them to the point of even proposing to come here. The financial feasibility study they're doing, I'm sure, is going to really nail it down and come up with some succinct numbers of both costs and expenses and costs and revenues, and really pencil out whether it works or not. And so that study's data, assuming CCA continues to move forward with USDA and they're loanable for that loan to move forward, that data from the study will factor into our negotiations and in terms of how much room there is for lease payments, whether it really needs to be $1 and they need to keep every nickel they make to make it work, or whether there's room for some rent to the city. That's yet to be seen.
I received some questions on this agenda item from a couple of citizens, and I have one at the end of my own. So as sort of a follow-along to Mark's question and your answer of approximately $24K, how much annual revenue under this would this lease site produce for the city under the city's present agreement with the Central Coast Aquarium?
Restate your question, please.
Sure. How much annual revenue would this lease site produce for the city under the city's present agreement with the Central Coast Aquarium?
Under the current lease?
Well,
Under the
they
Pipkin lease?
don't actually have, CCA.
Yeah.
CCA has some kind of an operating agreement with the city, tentative operating agreement with the city, correct? I mean, the city gave them a conditional use permit, did they not?
The city granted a consent of landowner
Thank you.
for them to submit their plans to planning, community development for processing.
Yeah.
That's on hold at this point because they've got to do financial feasibility first before they put together all their plans and submit.
Well, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. I thought you said they were going to occupy the building to make a presence.
They are intending to occupy the building. We do not yet have an agreement in place. I will be going to council on Monday to start getting into the nitty-gritty details on that.
Have they proposed some sort of recompense?
As CCA?
Yeah.
At this point, yeah, but that's confidential under negotiation.
Ah.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that will be resolved by the October meeting, October HAB meeting?
Could be.
When it is resolved, I know the citizen is going to want to know the results of whatever the financial arrangement is.
So it will, whatever agreement we end up coming up with, will go to regular city council public session for approval.
Okay.
Look for it on the consent, maybe not the consent agenda, there may be more discussion on it. It's a meaty enough and involved enough issue that it may not be a consent item, it may be a regular business item, but it'll go to regular session.
Okay. The same citizen asked, and I think you've already said that there isn't one right now, so we can't answer that. What's the length of the proposed temporary agreement? But apparently there isn't a temporary
We
agreement.
don't have one, and that's confidential under negotiation, sorry.
Okay. Has the city given the Central Coast Aquarium a date certain for completion of the USDA loan required feasibility study? That was part of the agreement back in 2016.
Not that I'm aware, and I'm pretty sure that, and I don't have my full file on it, but I'm pretty certain that that consent of landowner agreement, the dates in it are all expired.
I believe you're correct, and so is the citizen who researched it. I believe you're correct. Yeah. Well, I'll let that citizen contact council on their own. They're very interested in making sure that there's some sort of performance schedule. If the feasibility study that they're pursuing determines that an aquarium in Morro Bay is not financially viable, if you have any idea, what are the city's plans for the site?
Ultimately, obviously, that's going to be up to the city council, but I would anticipate we'd probably go back out to bid on it, back out to RFP. Unless somebody came forward in the meantime and had another proposal.
Has there been any discussion about the projected cost of demolishing the existing building and replacing it with a building, as was referred to by the CCA's executive director in the Tribune on September 4?
Can you refresh my memory on what that reference in the Tribune was?
Demolishing and rebuilding the building.
Yeah.
The executive director said that their plan was to demolish and rebuild the building. And is that part of the City of Morro Bay's expectations as it relates to CCA occupying that lease site?
Not on this short-term immediate basis, no. They would occupy the existing building. That had to have been in reference to the bigger project, assuming they get funding and move forward.
Okay. Given that the aquarium lease site does not have a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES permit, does the Central Coast Aquarium propose to obtain one for their envisioned operations plan?
They will be required to obtain whatever permitting is legally necessary, yes. My understanding, the NPDES permit on the existing aquarium was at least from my understanding from the RW Regional Water Quality Control Board, was that it's too small of a facility to warrant a permit. Mm-hmm. But all that, assuming the feasibility, and I use assumptions a lot tonight, assuming feasibility moves forward and produces a positive result, and they get their funding and the city agrees to move forward with them, they'll submit all their full plans and specifications to community development. They'll have to go through the concept plan approval, they'll have to go to Coastal Commission, they'll have to go to Army Corps of Engineers and Regional Water and all those regulators that have a hand in it. They'll definitely have to go and get whatever is necessary through that process.
Okay,
And even if the existing aquarium had some sort of a permit, I don't think that would be something that could be maintained into the new aquarium use. If the new aquarium use comes to be, I think that permit would have been held by the Tylers for that building, for that use, and a whole new aquarium would be a whole new process that has to start over. So there really was no permit lost, even though apparently there never was one in the first place.
I'm sure you're right about that. And the last question, my question is, according to the Central Coast Aquarium Executive Director, their USDA loan process could take up to 2 years. What will happen with the lease site for those 2 years? How much revenue will it produce for the city?
That's to be determined. Assuming and anticipating Central Coast Aquarium continues to operate it, my interest is going to be in them maintaining a presence there and expanding beyond what they're initially proposing. They're basically taking baby steps at this point to step in and take over and then see how it goes and go from there. But my intent would be to see them occupy and do as much as they can and generate as much revenue and activity as they can on that site up until the time that they move forward with the project.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on that lease site? No? Okay, thanks.
Okay. Lease site 9090W, Otter Rock Cafe. That site is currently in escrow with the owner of the Boatyard site next door, immediately to its south. They've gotten plan approval for, and we have a lease in place with that new owner, contingent upon that escrow closing. This all came out of the seawall partial collapse and negotiating our way through that process and coming up with a settlement with the Boatyard owner to deal with that seawall. And also, he elected to purchase the site next door and do a fair amount of improvements there. He's got Coastal Commission and City Council city approval for basically redoing, making a solid roof on it. There's a fair amount of structural work that needs to be done, a lot of restroom remodeling that needs to be done. Those restrooms were sort of remodeled out of code compliance over the years. The current building, if you're familiar with it, in the middle, if you're inside the building facing the water, walking towards the water, there's kind of two nodes of it that stick out with a section in the middle that initially was, when they built it, was going to have a gangway going down to the dock. They elected to use the lease site next door to access the dock, and so the gangway was never built, so there's sort of a notch in the building. They're going to close that off and incorporate that into the restaurant to add restaurant space. They got a potential new restaurant operator coming in. The retail shop will stay in front. The trash dumpster, which is now inside the restaurant, amazingly, will go outside in a proper enclosure outside. And been doing a good amount of upgrades to that lease site over this winter. Hopefully to open up next summer. Redoing the dock. The dock moves seaward a little ways and expands a little bit. The harbor walk remains the same. The existing harbor walk stays the same. So. Yeah, that's about it on the plans for that. So hopefully that all continues to go through and they get through escrow and the seawall gets done and that project gets done. This anticipated to occur all this winter. They want to start in January and get done this winter and be back open for business and have it all ready to go by spring and summer when the season starts back up. Any questions on that?
They're putting in new slips, is that correct?
Yeah, another side tie type dock. It's a
Yes.
little larger, but just a single.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And finally, lease site 141 at the United States Coast Guard. As I spoke earlier, the Coast Guard site is woefully undersized for the current mission. They came into about $1.4 million about in 2013 and we've been working with them to try and help them spend it on something. It's been a very interesting process, almost like the boatyard 28-year project. The Coast Guard has been trying to do something new and different for about the 20-plus years I've been with the department. We've had plans revised and re-revised over the years. They've got some real funding. They've determined their best course of action at this point is to build onto the back of their building and add about 1,800 square feet. It'll take out the 5 parking spaces immediately up against their building. We went to City Council back on the 14th, and the council granted them permission, consent to the landowner to go forward with that project. They wanted to go further back into the parking lot, but that would have triggered traffic flow and studies and parking studies, because as soon as you start affecting traffic flow and parking, you got to start doing all the studies, and they don't have the time or funding for that. Their funding runs out at the end of the next federal fiscal year that's starting this October 1 and expires September 30th, 2019, so they need to have it obligated and maybe not completely spent, but at least committed to a contractor. And so they're moving forward as fast as they can to submit plans, get them approved by the Planning Commission and City Council, and then get a contractor on board and get the money spent. So that is their plan. They are still interested. They really wanted our office building space. We gave them a consent of landowner to build on the restroom site next door, where the public restroom is between us and Krill Saltwater Taffy, with an option to potentially use our office site. About 2 years ago, we proposed to them what would make that happen for us using our office site, because obviously the Harbor Department needs to go somewhere. And we were willing to move over to the restroom site, but we have, as we know, we're a little short on funding. And so we proposed a rent structure by which they could pay enough to enable us to take out a loan to build a new building for ourselves. They're currently paying $1 a year for their site. They pay about 20 some odd thousand for their slips and pier use, but they're paying $1 a year, and we proposed a fair market rate and gave them a number, and they weren't willing to go there, and so we couldn't commit to leaving our department site. But they're still interested in it. They're actually doing an appraisal right now, reappraising the value of it and reappraising, because when we looked at it before, they didn't appraise a fair market rent. We came up with a number based on our normal way of operating and how we looked at things with our waterfront leaseholders. But they need to do their own federal appraisal, and they're working on that right now. And if they do an appraisal that says, they can pay, $30,000 a year or whatever the number is we need to crack a loan nut, they may change their mind and do a different project. But right now it looks like they're doing the add-on to the backside of their building. And then they'll re-facade and remodel their existing building. They'll go up 2 stories, so it won't go any higher than the existing building. Then they're going to redo kind of the whole facade of the building, not entirely to change its character, but it'll from the renderings I've seen, it won't look like 1,800 square feet scabbed onto the back. It'll look like it was built like that from the beginning.
Gene.
There's that 4 or 5 feet between the Coast Guard building and your building. Could they use some of that? Or is it unfeasible?
Probably unfeasible, as you probably know, and if you've seen, they've got that big wall built between, because when they built the building, because of the proximity, that's a fire prevention wall, so they'd have to redo that, so not really practical.
Peter.
No comment.
Lynn.
If they do remodel it the way you're currently talking, do they expect that to serve their purposes for an extended period of time, or is this kind of a Band-Aid?
It's a Band-Aid. Well, maybe not a Band-Aid. Maybe it's a gauze pad and some tape. It's a little more than a Band-Aid. Like I said, they need a lot more space than what they have. Right now, they're the only surf station in the nation that can't house both male and female guardsmen, because they don't have the facilities to properly accommodate the two sexes, so they're stuck with only having male Coast Guardsmen, and they really want to change that. I don't know that this will enable that, because their problem is that that station was built to house the administrative uses for 2 Coast Guard cutters. That's changed drastically, obviously, and now they need, at times in the winter when it's heavy weather, 2 duty crews on duty simultaneously, and they can't even now house them like that without having guys sleep on couches and cots on the floor, and it's a lot to ask of those guys. I mean, they do heroic duty doing that, but it's really not the right way to do it, so they'll at least hopefully be able to house those 2 crews overnight in beds a little more properly when it's heavy weather during the winter, but I don't think it's going to get them to the point where they're going to be able to do everything they need to do now.
So it's still kind of a pending. Thank
Mark.
you.
Nothing at this time.
Dana? Therese?
As far as the Harbor Walk, we have all the different businesses as they do developments, they have to piecemeal the Harbor Walk together. All right, what are the plans as far as the Harbor Walk goes from where it kind of stops in the parking lot, and then as it goes to Harbor Hut, I think is the other terminal end?
Morway Landing is where it ends. The plans, as I recall, that I've seen, where it ends, up at our end by the Coast Guard in the entryway there, it dives in front of Morro Bay Oyster Company to the revetment, then follows the revetment down and then in through the alleyway, and I'm not quite sure how, through the alleyway, and then dives back out in front of Morro Bay Landing. The funding they had gotten, the city had gotten for that, they built as much as they could, and I suspect they didn't do the part in front of us and the fish dock and Tognazzini's, and elected to do other parts because it is logistically quite challenging. You got emergency vehicles running in and out with us and the Coast Guard. You've got basically industrial operations going on with the fish dock. It's, in my personal opinion, I think the Harbor Walk needs to stay on the street until it gets over to where it terminates in front of Bob Fowler's place, because it doesn't make sense to run it through that alley. Maybe you can somehow attach it to along the side of Tognazzini's main restaurant. You could have it go through there. It may not be the full 8 feet, but at least a Harbor Walk walkway, so people aren't walking blindly through that alley as they do now, or the parking lot, because it is in a good situation. It's just, and a ton of people use it, as you know. I mean, people walk it from end to end, and yeah.
If you know, what's the north-south dimension on the back of that Coast Guard building?
I don't know, but where they're going to add on?
Yeah.
I'm going to say 35 feet.
I think you're closer to it.
I'm just turning parking spaces sideways in my mind, thinking how long a car would go. A car's about 20 feet, 22 feet. 35, 40 feet maybe.
Oh, you just gave me the east-west. So it's going to go...
No, north-south.
So it's going to go toward Embarcadero about 20 feet?
It will go toward the Embarcadero, probably 12 feet, and then it will probably go north to south. I believe it's 50 feet.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't get what you're asking, but yeah, the into the spaces, because they're diagonal, the standard parking space is what, 20 feet? 18. So they're diagonal, so it probably goes out maybe 15 feet off their building towards the Embarcadero, and then whatever that length is, if that's 50 feet.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Anything else on that agenda item?
Not unless you have something.
No? Okay, so that brings us to declaration of future agenda items. Is there any board member that would like to declare a future agenda item? I don't see any hands going up. So we received, because I sent it on to you all, a letter from a Morro Bay citizen having to do with the, I'll paraphrase, the cleanliness of the Tidelands Trust ground lease sites and the condition and cleanliness of the light posts, which I believe, Eric, are PG&E's property. Is that true?
Yeah, all those black light poles and the wooden ones with the big arms, those are all PG&E owns and maintains.
And then the city's got a couple of little ones, if I recall, somewhere.
Yeah, we probably got a few little ones peppered here and there, maybe on our Anchor Memorial Park dock and things like that. But everything along the street, both sides, that's all PG&E.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is to propose an agenda item, something in the order of identify/review responsible parties for cleanliness of waterfront ground lease sites and light posts. Is the board okay with something like that, or with that?
Wouldn't this fall within the Public Works and their advisory board?
You mean the Public Works that doesn't pay any attention to it?
Fair
Well,
enough.
the lease site per se, the sidewalk, yes, but there's also, citizens also have issues with some of the ground space and the lease sites as well, which are often contiguous with the sidewalks. So the sidewalks ain't our business. That's a fact, Jack. But it may not be an appropriate agenda item, trying to be responsive to the citizen. So if it's not within our province, although we have extended ourselves, beyond the Tidelands Trust lease sites for a variety of things over the years, is this something we want to discuss?
I'll say sure.
Okay. All right. We'll do it. Lynn, you're thinking.
I was thinking about the restroom problems that we keep talking about. Does this relate to that in any way?
We could certainly add that. I don't know what we can do about it. We've talked about this stuff before in a general sense, but I'm hopeful that what we'll end up doing with this is, what will come out of this is a recommendation to council.
Better than nothing when it comes to council.
Yeah, with some, and as specific as possible, not how to, but what. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Lori, did that wording make any sense to you at all? Okay, thanks. Okay, that brings us to, Dana, you had something?
Just a comment. We used to have like this little comment thing right before you. Anyway, under wind energy generation, that item, is there any updates? I thought I read in the paper there was a meeting coming up. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you have anything on your?
On which item?
With the wind farm.
We
Article over the weekend.
We are, Lori's grabbing the future agenda. We're working with Trident to put together, in October, an update and a business item and a city council meeting. It's on the tentative agenda for October 9th. I think that's what might have been mentioned in that article.
Okay.
They're still moving forward on trying to get BOEM to move forward on the leasing process. They're working with Department of Defense on the DOD's issues. So tentatively on October 9th, we're looking at that. And I believe we're trying to plan a stakeholder informational meeting, and that might even be in September. And thanks for reminding me. I think we're Trident's looking to just come to the community, kind of like we did with the Marine Sanctuary issue, just a group get-together, Q&A session.
Okay, I'd like to, you can keep me informed.
Yeah, we'll be sure, and we'll advertise that far and wide, better than the towing charges, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Sharice nodded her head. So, and Lynn seconded it. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Carries. Thank you. Thank you very much.